The Norman and Florence Brody Family Foundation is dedicated to exploring topics of national and international importance and is proud to support Policy Watch with Doug Besheroff at the University of Maryland. Court cases and their verdicts often come to define pivotal moments in American history. Legal controversies like those of President Clinton and O.J. Simpson captivate the public and influence popular culture. Doug Besheroff discussed the impact of such cases with top trial lawyer Billy Martin, whose clients include Monica Lewinsky and Jason Williams. And now, Doug Besheroff.
Billy Martin. Welcome to the University of Maryland and Policy Watch.
Good morning. Glad to be here.
We're delighted to have you.
Thank you.
You're now one of the nation's most prominent and successful lawyers. In fact, Washingtonian magazine listed you fourth in their top Washington lawyers. And you've had some of the biggest cases to handle in the last decade or so. Let me go right to probably the biggest case, an attempt to unseat the President of the United States. Time magazine called you, let me read it, Monica's, that's Monica as in Monica Lewinsky's Minister of Defense. How did you like that title?
Actually, that was probably the most intriguing case, matter, investigation I've ever handled. I've had the benefit of having 15 years as a federal prosecutor. During my tenure as a federal prosecutor, I supervised the U.S. Attorney's Office in Washington and supervised the investigation of Marion Barry during his charges. And I thought that was going to be my biggest case until Lewinsky. And when that case hit, we made some decisions that helped convince Monica and her mother that a defense was possible. And when Time magazine asked her to describe what I had done, she came up with the title. It really was a compliment, and I took it as such.
It was very nice. Now, you were not their first lawyer. There was a fellow named Ginsburg.
I was the mother's. I was Marcia. Her mother was Marcia Lewis. I was Marcia's first lawyer. And after we had worked out, grew up in Pittsburgh, but have a history of prosecuting and defending cases in Washington. So I think I'm a local. I'm a Washingtonian. Mm-hmm. And we were able to talk to Judge Kenneth Starr, who was the special prosecutor, and his staff to work out a procedure to get the mother, Marcia Lewis, out of the grand jury. When she saw that I was able to do that, she asked me, can you also help my daughter? So we then took over and helped Monica as well.
Now there were a number of very prominent lawyers, and many of them spent a great deal of time either on the talk shows or in front of the cameras. I don't remember you being in front of the cameras that much.
I have a policy, and I love doing these type of appearances where I get to talk about the law and talk to the community about the law. But in the middle of an investigation, it's rare that I will go on TV. In that case, we were so afraid that if I said the wrong thing, I could waive the attorney-client privilege, and then the defense for both Marcia and her daughter would be lost. We didn't take that risk.
You said that ended up being the biggest case you handled. What lessons did you learn from it, either lawyerly lessons or political lessons?
The lesson that I learned as a lawyer, and having had the benefit of 15 years as a prosecutor and 15 years now as a defense attorney, I really do believe that our system of justice works. We may all challenge it at times that may be unfair to certain groups or unfair to certain crimes, or just unfair at times. But when I went through the impeachment of President Clinton, I then became frightened because I thought that there was an effort to unseat an elected president outside our established judicial system. And I became frightened that they were going to be able to do that outside the framework of the Constitution. And when the Senate and the House and the vote came where the president was not removed, I thought that the system worked. So I felt much better having participated in a system where even though it was painful to go through, in the end, I think our system of justice did work.
Now, a great deal of the back and forth before that vote and in the criminal cases, I think were involved in an attempt by Mr. Starr in the special prosecutor's office to get Marsha Lewinsky to testify quite directly against the president. And that never did happen, is that right?
Well, no, actually they did. Both Marsha and Monica did both testify. They both testified, some in a grand jury and some outside a grand jury.
I meant, but she didn't push the button that said, yes, he coached me. And
oh, no, that would have been untrue.
Right.
I think that they were looking to find a way to convince either the public or court of law that the president had obstructed justice, that he had coached Monica to say certain things. And in our investigation, that was never true. What really happened here was very sad. Many of the interns had come in. A young lady comes in and had the opportunity to meet the president. Some relationship was established, and she did not want to discuss that relationship publicly, and she didn't have a choice in the end.
You mentioned about how you had been a prosecutor. Sure. So I have a list here. So you prosecuted Larry Flint?
My office mate in my early days as a young lawyer in Cincinnati. Larry Flint was prosecuted. It was my office mate. But I had a chance to sit through the court trial, my first year of law school. And actually at the time, Larry Flint was more on abortion and Roe v. Wade issues. And he was showing films and pictures of dismembered bodies, baby bodies. And he was prosecuted for that, and that's the only successful prosecution of Larry Flint.
When I was a young lawyer in New York City, we went after some of the smut peddlers.
Sure.
So I had all the exhibits in my office. I was a very popular young prosecutor. It's Marion Barry.
Yes.
What was that all about?
There were two investigations that I think we can talk about now publicly. There was an investigation into allegations that Marion Barry was steering contracts that should have been awarded to other people, to friends. And there was money that he was promoting his own private interest through some of these contracts. And there was a major investigation, I might call a crime investigation, by the Department of Justice into those allegations. Well, along the way, it was learned that Marion Barry was developing a problem with cocaine and with extramarital affairs. And the decision was made to use an old female friend, a girlfriend, and to entice him with some crack cocaine. I can tell you that having then been a career prosecutor, I really wasn't a supporter of the use of crack cocaine and sex to bring down an elected official. And I shortly thereafter left the Department of Justice and went into private practice as a partner in a major law firm. But the investigation really, I thought, should have been about corruption and not about sex and drugs.
Now, at the time, if I remember correctly, quite a lot was made of the fact that it was a black prosecutor who was handling the case. Is that right?
Ricky Roberts and Judy Retchin were the two lawyers we assigned to prosecute the case. The prosecutor at the time, who had been appointed by George Herbert Walker Bush, was Jay Stevens. Jay Stevens is a white male, and he really was the head prosecutor of the office. But we did have a black male and a white female as our head trial teams.
As a trial team.
They're both now, Richard Roberts is a U.S. District Court judge in Washington, and Judy is a D.C. Superior Court judge, also in D.C.
You did not like bringing that kind of case?
Well, I can just say that as a career prosecutor, you really like to, it's not whether I like it or don't like it, and if you'll know that during the course of the trial, he was acquitted on most all charges. And what you'll see is that it's hard to get a public jury to convict for sex and drugs. You've got to catch them with their hands in the till, with money in their pockets, but sex and drugs make it sometimes impossible. And, you know, the old saying, if you're going to shoot an elephant, you've got to kill him. And if you go after a very prominent, high elected official, you want to find money, or you want to find some type of fraud or corruption. Normally, sex and drugs are difficult to get convictions with.
You've spent a fair amount of time representing sports figures.
Sure.
You started early on when you were in Pittsburgh?
I started early on in Pittsburgh representing the Pittsburgh Pirates. My law firm represented all the sports franchises, the Pirates, the Steelers, and the Penguins. And being from Pittsburgh, it was kind of my dream come true. That I got a chance to work with all the sports franchises. So I learned sports law from the ownership side and not from the player side. And then bit by bit, as you were welcomed into by the teams, when players who sometimes get into trouble, when they got into trouble, the team would use me as a referral, and I started representing hockey players.
So was there too much money, too many women, too much opportunity? What is it?
I think what it is when you have so much talent at such an early age, people begin catering to your talent, and they allow you to act in a way that doesn't force you to accept full responsibility for your conduct. And sometimes it's not until they reach adulthood, and you can imagine some of these, the minimum contract is $3 million a year. So you can imagine that for a 20-year-old, 18, 19-year-old now, making $5, $10 million a year, it's a lot of money if you've never learned how to really be responsible with your conduct.
Well, that's one kind of celebrity. And in the last decade or two, we've had many prosecutions of American celebrities.
Sure.
I think many people looked at the O.J. Simpson trial. Well, there are many different ways to look at that. But one way was to start asking the question, can someone with an unlimited amount of money to pay for a legal defense buy his or her way out of jail? More recently, Robert Blake, Beretta. From reading the newspapers, one thinks these are overwhelming cases, and yet no convictions. What should we think about the ability to bring a celebrity to trial and to justice?
It's an interesting question, and the answer, I think, speaks more to the reason the decision was made to charge those celebrities sometimes than it does to the quantum or the quality of the proof.
You're thinking, for example, of the Jackson case.
Well, I'm thinking also of Beretta.
Do you really?
Well, if you think of Beretta, there were not a lot of people who thought that there was sufficient evidence to convict him. I mean, the public, we heard the evidence, but the people, they bought testimony. They had cooperating witnesses. They had, and which is normally what you get when you are a prosecutor. You can rarely, if ever, prove a case just on.
When you say bought testimony, you mean they gave someone immunity so that they could testify, or give them a lower?
Absolutely. They had people there who had been convicted in the past of crimes and who were involved in ongoing crimes, who told them that they would be willing to testify against Blake in exchange for dismissal of charges. So they were really trying to stack the deck with people who knew Blake to get their testimony. So I think that the decision to try Michael Jackson, now there's no doubt that he is very, very, he's different. You wonder what type of parent would allow their child to sleep in the bed with any grown person, male or female. There's something wrong with the parent who would allow that conduct to occur.
We should quickly say not all the parents whose children were there allowed that or knew about it, or some did, some didn't.
Correct.
You just emphasize
that. But the issue, the ones who really had come to the public's attention did know, and many of them allowed their children to sleep over. But there did not seem sufficient evidence in this case, with the evidence that they had on Michael, to try it. And they have what they call prior crimes evidence. Prior crimes evidence means that if something else happened in your past, we can use it in this trial to show that it wasn't a mistake or an accident, or to show you intent. And the bulk of the Michael Jackson trial was prior crime evidence, and I think that the jury wasn't convinced of the motives of the prosecutor in bringing up all the past to go after Michael.
This goes to the question about the Robert Blake case, and I think I'm maybe on thin ice here. the Chandra Levy case,
Sure.
which you were also involved in representing the parents. It seemed from a distance that the police had a theory of the case, and that prevented them from looking elsewhere. This was a young intern here in Washington, D.C.
Sure. Chandra Levy was a young lady who, from Modesto, California, who had come to Washington to serve as an intern with the Department of Justice at the Bureau of Prisons. According to news reports, she came here and, according to her aunt, developed a romantic relationship with an elected official, a congressman, and got into the thrill of life in Washington. And one day she disappeared. So the family was concerned. The police were slow to list the case as a missing persons case, and the parents called me. They called me based upon what they saw, the work that I did with Monica. They called to say that we need somebody who can help us. But the police, I don't know if they had a theory or not. The family was not convinced that they were doing all that they could, and the family wanted to hire me, and we have a team of retired homicide detectives in our Washington office. So they asked us to undertake a separate investigation to see if we could come up with anything different, and we did. And I think that there was sometimes some friction. Chief Ramsey is a colleague and a friend, but I think there's at times friction between the chief and what we were doing, because he thought that it was his job to do the investigation, and we were just trying to, I think what any parent would want, to push them to do a little more.
How many months before sadly her remains were found in the park?
It was a year before her remains were found. Well, the issue here is, what resources does a police community have to investigate every missing person case? And we think that they were just slow in getting going.
So before we close, you are truly one of the nation's power lawyers. So I like to ask this question because I didn't in my wildest dreams think I'd be sitting up here with one of the nation's most prominent trial lawyers. Did you, in your wildest dreams, when you were a young person, think you'd be where you are today?
I dreamed of this. I always thought that I was very good at debate. I thought that I was a very good student. But no, I could not have imagined that people would, I tell my wife, Michelle, and I a lot that some of the trials that we handle, you asked an earlier question of, can money buy justice? No. But it can put a team in place that can give you the best performance or the best chances you get. Never in my wildest dream could I have imagined that I one day would be able to, on a very short list, and I got a call from Michael Jackson camp, I get a call from almost every major matter that happens to see if we can represent them. It's a blessing. I appreciate the blessing. I would not be able to do this without my wife. You're going to talk with Michelle later. Michelle and my children are very supportive. There are sometimes stretches where I'm gone months at a time. Sometimes I think last year we were gone for 4 months.
Now, I read that you were on this is the Jason Williams case?
The Jason Williams trial in New Jersey, the NBA player accused of shooting his limousine driver. And we were in trial for 4 months away from my home. So it's a big sacrifice. And I have a family that toughs it with me, and we make it through.
I asked you in preparation for today, I asked you whether you thought your race helped or hindered you.
Sure.
And you said it opened doors.
I think that, I don't think that my race has won any cases for me. I think that my race opportunities have been created to level the playing field for minorities. And once I was allowed an opportunity to get on the playing field, I think that it's race neutral, because you have to produce. As a young prosecutor in Cincinnati, went to law school at the University of Cincinnati, and as a young prosecutor in the city prosecutor's office, in my first month of being a prosecutor, I would walk around to people asking them, do you have a case I can take? I'd like to try it. And in the 3 years I did that, I probably tried 40 or 50 cases. learning to make mistakes on the small cases so that by the time that you get to these cases, there's no margin for error. If I were representing you, Doug, and we can guarantee you that you don't
Given the kinds of cases you've had, I hope you never do represent them.
See, the other kind of cases that we represent, in addition to my criminal practice, we represent corporate America, where there are multi-million-dollar
You've still let me
deals.
off. It is time to turn to our audience for questions.
Hello, Mr. Martin. My name is Exodi Rowe, and my question is, I'm concerned about the justice system. You said that you believe in the justice system, and I do to a certain extent, but when you look at the facts right now about the disparities between minorities in the prison system and whites in the prison system, I think you'll find that it's a little unjust right now. And I think the statistic, there's about 2 million prisoners in the justice system, in the criminal justice system, and minorities compose 800,000 of those criminals in the justice system. So I just wanted to know what your thoughts are, if there are any initiatives that the justice system is doing to try to improve the situation.
I, too, am very troubled. Good question. I think that our justice system does reflect a pattern that should be troubling to all of us. The percentage of minorities who are incarcerated is troubling. The percentage of juveniles who are being charged as adults is troubling. When I said that our system worked, what I was referring to not the numbers that we see in terms of the impact on the minority community, but that in our three branches of government, there was a branch outside trying to unseat the president, and that attempt to unseat the president did not work. So when I say that our system of government was working, our system of justice was working, it was in the framework of the structure of the government. To answer your question, I've always been troubled. When I tell you I was a prosecutor for 15 years, I was very troubled by the high numbers of minorities who are incarcerated. A lot of those people are now charged with drugs, and it's troubling because if you look at those numbers, those people are going to be coming back into our communities, and if you lock them up but don't train them, educate them, or re-socialize them, all we have are people coming in with a prison mentality back into the community. I agree with your assertion that it does not seem to be, the disparities are not fair. What are the initiatives? I don't know on the initiatives, other than trying to be more active, all of us, and seeing that appropriate crimes are charged and appropriate punishment is dispensed. But I don't think your observations are wrong. There's such a large prison industry, and there's an industry that we've even turned privatization of the prison industry. We had sentencing guidelines where you had mandatory minimums. So you took all the discretion away from the judges and just started locking people up. And I think we're now paying for the get tough mentality. And believe me, for the 15 years when I served as prosecutor, I was a pretty tough prosecutor.
I think I can tell.
I had the same reputation as a defense attorney that I now have. And I've always been troubled with some of the decisions to just lock people up because what happens when they come out? Yeah. We've never addressed that.
Let's turn to our next question now.
My name is Rashad Jones, and I'm a student at Georgetown University. My question pertains to the work that you do with sports law. Sure. I'm wondering what you think of sort of this new trend for the NBA and leagues like the MLB to be recruiting athletes at such a young age. The NBA recruits from high school, and I'm wondering whether or not there's a correlation or there's some pattern between the age, or maybe the younger the athletes come into the major leagues and the amount of legal trouble they get into. Do you see some type of pattern between young ages and the amount of legal trouble they get into, or does it just pertain to the individual person?
What's interesting, and I'm very fond of Georgetown, we talked about some of my background. The person who gave me my real opportunity to represent NBA players and college players was Georgetown coach John Thompson. Coach Thompson was one of my first prominent sports clients, and we remain friends to this day. But going back to your question, I think that I don't know the answer, and I'll tell you why I don't know the answer. You take somebody like LeBron James, who comes right out of high school, and you couldn't tell that he was fresh from high school. You take others, Kwame Brown, who comes out and he's still very, very immature. For years and years and years, hockey has had no bars to recruiting, hockey or baseball, to recruiting kids right out of high school to play in the minors in either baseball or hockey. It was only in basketball and football. I think that if you're going to, and the NBA now has an age limit of 19. I think you have to get through 1 year graduation, past your graduating year in high school. I think there should be an opportunity. If you come out, especially now that we have so many young people sent to Iraq or going into the military, if you can go abroad and die for your country, and you have a skill that you can play a sport, why should you not be able to play that sport? So I think that we just need better training and more control. But I'm not in favor of, if you're 18 years old and can play a sport better than me, people want to see the best athletes, and I think they should be allowed to compete for those positions.
Billy Martin, thank you so much.
We are PBS,